Hey everybody, welcome back to the 80s Slashers YouTube channel. In this video, we will be going back to take a look at the year 1982 and all the slasher films released that year. Now, 1982 it was an interesting year for the slasher film because even though it didn't realize it at the time, it was following what would later be known as probably the greatest year of all time for slasher films. So looking back at it now, in hindsight, it's no wonder that it is kind of hard not to view this year as a slight disappointment, to be perfectly honest. Now, that is not to say that there wasn't some fantastic slashers released in 1982, because there definitely were. But when you look at the year as a whole, you see that there were just a lot of films that just really haven't stood the test of time, I guess. Unlike the majority of films released the year prior, 1982 just had it just had a lot of films that I guess you would classify as just kind of mediocre slashers. They're still fun, they're still entertaining. I'm like I said, I'm someone who probably likes most, if not all, of these films for one reason or another. But they're not, considered, the best the genre had to offer. There's just a lot of, average films that was released this year. So before we get, too deep into the year and yeah, just reviewing the year, what I want to do, we'll start by, just looking at a brief overview of the year itself. Then we'll list, we'll list all of the slashers that were released throughout the year. Then we'll take a look at some stats, things such as like the budgets and, some box office returns and like profitability, all that sort of stuff. And then I'll wrap it up just by giving my my overall final thoughts on the year. All right, so yeah, let's just get right into it. So what I'll do here, we'll first take a look at just kind of a brief an overview of the 1982 year in slashers. So what's interesting is this is a year, this 1982 is not a year that was lacking for slashers. As you can see, there was, from, again, this is from what the films that I list or categorize as an 80s slasher, the ones that fit my criteria. There's probably other people who have some of these not on their list. There's probably some films that I'm missing, that maybe I'm not familiar with, I haven't seen. I just don't view them as an 80s slasher. But for me, I have 21 films, which is a lot when you think about it. That's a lot of films in one subgenre over the course of one year. If you don't recall, in my previous video in 1981, the year in slashers, that year also had 21 slasher films. So it's not like the in terms of quantity, the genre was slowing down. Quality, that's maybe another issue that we're going to explore in this video. But unfortunately, as you probably looking at what's on the screen here, for whatever reason, 1982, there's not a lot of statistical information that I was able to find for a lot of these films in terms of budgets and box office returns and tickets sold. So yeah, it's kind of hard to compare apples to apples, with other years, just because we don't have the data. But we can make some pretty good guesses as we continue on here. But yeah, so approximate movie tickets sold, I don't know. Like, there's probably a couple films that we have the listings for, but in terms of the class of 82, there's not much there. Now, again, approximate box office sales. What I have is, like, we'll go over this a little later, but I only, of the 21 films, there's only 4 films that that I was able to pull information for. So those 4 films, they equaled almost $54 million in adjusted for inflation to today. That's 146 million. So nothing to sneeze at. It's still a good haul for, especially like I said, for 4 films. Most of that is for one film, which we'll talk about. I'm sure you're all familiar with which film is that. But yeah, like it's not the biggest box office return. Um, we always talk about the number of holiday themed films. Films that have like a holiday or an event or a special thing that a lot of these slasher films like to play up. Only 4 this year, so it's a step down. This is the first year, 1982, that we get our first 3D film in the 80s slasher genre, which is kind of a cool thing. Yeah, that's yeah. Like I said, well, again, we'll talk about that a little bit. But it's something that didn't really catch on. But and unlike last year, number of Tom Savini films, we had 0. I believe there was 4 films in '81, and number of Jamie Lee Curtis films. This is the first year in the '80s that we don't get a Jamie Lee Curtis slasher film. 80 we had 2, I believe, and in '81 we had 1. Yeah, so actually, what I wanted to do is, I just kind of wanted to compare this to the previous year. So if we take a look and we just kind of look at the 1981 versus the 1982 kind of numbers here, like you'll see the total slashers released, it's the same, 21 slashers throughout the year, so pretty solid. Now, if you look at the approximate box office sales, 81. Now, again, I had a bigger sampling for for the stats that I was able to find, but it's double here. 102 million versus 53 million, so almost double the sales. Now, like I said, I only have 4 4 films listed for box office returns for 1984, but they're the biggest ones. And even if I had another 10, some of these films, like they definitely didn't make up. They wouldn't have bridged the gap for to double. So it was a down year for box office sales, no question about it. This was, for whatever reason, just as many films did not make nearly as much money. Now, again, number of holiday themed films, 1981 had 7 of them, so it was quite a popular trend. And like I said, in 1982 we dropped down to 4. So there's a big discrepancy there. Again, Savini films 4 to 0 in this year, and Jamie Lee Curtis films 1 film in '81 and none in 1982. So yeah, I guess the big question is why was 1982 kind of a disappointing year. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly the reasons, but some of my speculations that I have, probably the biggest one is probably viewer fatigue, I would think. As we discussed in the 1981 video, there probably wasn't a single weekend in 1981 where if you went to the movie theater, you couldn't catch an '80s slasher or a slasher film. Every week there was probably a new one coming, or one still playing from previous weeks past. So a year of that, there was probably some fatigue setting in with the people, just getting tired of the slasher film. Another possible reason is, when you put out, over 20 films in one year, there's probably a lack of ideas of creativity going around, like maybe, some of the, most of the holidays were taken, so they couldn't think of good titles or holidays kind of things to set these films around. So, that could be an issue, just trouble coming up with new new ways to make these films. But another thing that I suspect that was starting to happen, and it's kind of surprising it started in 1982, just a year after 81 and like the peak of the genre. But 1980 and 1981 really proved that you could make one of these films with a very small budget, and if you do it right, you can take home big profits at the box office. And that, that's the reason why these films took off is as much as they did, why they were being made so much. And I feel like the beginning in 1982 is, these people, they were starting to take it a little more to the extreme. They were, trying to come up with like lower budgets, and but instead of making a good film, they were just putting together a decent title, throwing on some decent cover art to attract people. But the film itself was that they were lesser quality, and audiences aren't stupid, and they look for certain things, and if they go to a bad movie and it's not making as much sense as the other ones were, it's not as entertaining, there's not as much blood or kills, they're cheaping out on the budgets with the practical effects. Word of mouth spreads, and yeah, it's just it doesn't do as well. So those are just some, again, just speculations on my part of what exactly went on in 1982. Um, but yeah, before we go any further, let's just take a look at all the films and see what films we're actually talking about, so you guys can judge for yourself the quality of these 21 films. So the first film released in 1982 was in February, and it was Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker. Then in March, we had, now this is we had the film The New York Ripper, which is part giallo, part 80s slasher. It's an Italian film by director Lucio Fulci, but it still firmly falls within the 80s slasher genre. Then in April we get the film X-Ray, also known as Hospital Massacre. And we also get in April the film called The Dorm That Dripped Blood, which is also known as Pranks. Now, when May hits, May and June, this is when the floodgates opened in 1982. So in May, we get the film Death Valley. Then we get Death Screams. And we get a film called The Ghost Dance. And closing out May, we get Visiting Hours. And then when we get to June of 82, we have 4 more films. So 4 films in May, 4 more films released in June. So in June, we get Island of Blood, also known as Whodunit. We get The Forest. Then we have Honeymoon Horror. And closing out June, a film called Girls Night Out. I believe that there's an alternate title to that one too. I believe it's called, I think it's called like The Scare Maker or something to that effect. I think it's The Scare Maker. So then in July, there was no film. So in January, July, and in December, there was no films released. And then in August, we get the big one. The big one in 1982, of course, was Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D. So, middle of the year, they dropped the big one. And then in September, the lone release is a film called Humongous. And then in October, as you can imagine, it is the busiest month of the year, with the Halloween season, horror films, especially popular. So in October, we get Blood Song. And then we get The Slayer. And then we get Deadly Games. Then there's a film called Unhinged. And to close out October, very fittingly, of course, is a film called Trick or Treats. And then In November, we get two films, Alone in the Dark, and to close out the year, the last film released in 1982, November, is The Slumber Party Massacre. So yeah, that's um that's the films, and like I said, that's there's a lot of films there. That's a lot of films. And again, if you look at, like, it was a pretty steady release schedule throughout the year, just like 1981. It started a little slow, January, February, March, April, but once May hit, it was pretty nonstop until the end of the year. Um, like yeah, like I said, like if you look at like just a quick thing here, like slashers released through January through April, like there was only four. So again, they were trickling out early, but then once you get to May through July, you get a total of eight films released. Death Valley, Island of Blood, Death Screams, The Forest, Ghost Dance, Honeymoon Horror, Visiting Hours, and Girls Night Out. Um, and then again, it just keeps going from August all the way up to the end of the year. There's another nine films released in that span. Friday 13th Part 3, Humongous, Bloodsong, The Slayer, Deadly Games, Unhinged, Trick or Treats, Alone in the Dark, and The Slumber Party Massacre. So it, it's a pretty solid in terms of release schedule throughout the year. The clear difference is just in the quality of films. Again, well, I'll probably just keep coming back to this. Like, why? What was the reason? But like when you look at the list of these films, like all together on the screen, you just look at them, and like I said, there is some good films in here. There's some really good films in here. Some, like I said, some great films, but again, this is just my personal opinion. But when I look at these films, there's just a lot of forgettable titles. When I look at this list, there's basically, if I was to break these down into like A level films in terms of the 80s slasher, there's really only three that I would classify as A level. Of course you have Friday the 13th Part 3. You have the Slumber Party Massacre, and I would throw in the New York Ripper, because I think it's a really solid film. And then there's would be another tier down, I guess you would call it a B level tier. Again, really solid films. Stuff like I would put, like, The Dorm That Dripped Blood, Visiting Hours, Alone in the Dark. I could be convinced to throw in some films. You know, yeah, those three. I, yeah. Films like The Slayer. I'll throw The Slayer in just for fun, but a majority of the rest of the list is another tier below. Things like The Ghost Dance and The Forest, Island of Blood, Unhinged, Deadly Games, Bloodsong. It's just Honeymoon Horror. There's just a lot of films. Like, again, I'm not saying they're bad films or they're not enjoyable films. They just, for whatever reason, they just didn't grab audiences. A good rule of thumb, I always say, like, looking back on it now, which films have Blu-ray releases? That's a good way to measure, like, if the popularity is there, because there's a track record of them, of sales on VHS, and then sales on DVD, and then sales on re-release of DVDs, and then of course when Blu-ray hits, sales of them on Blu-ray. Um, the bigger, more popular films, they get the Blu-ray release almost immediately when a new format hits. But some of these films, they didn't even make it on DVD. And some of them are on DVD, but they're out of print, and there's no plan to release anything further. So that I know of. Hopefully they all get a Blu-ray release, because I want them all on Blu-ray. But it kind of speaks to where the staying power, I guess, of these films are. So yeah, so I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting thing. Now again, like I said, when we take a look at like the reasons why maybe there was a downtick in quality, or like a disappointment, one of the things I mentioned is when you look at like the holiday themed films. Now again, this is again my opinion on how I view the genre, but the holiday themed films from 80 and 81, they're the ones who did the best. People, something about that, you have it in the title, and then not just the title of the film, but it's set around, that holiday or the event, and it's just there's just something about that, because when you go to watch these films, everybody participates in these. Everyone has a prom night. Everyone has a birthday. Like everyone does Halloween. Everyone, is superstitious on Friday the 13th. These are things that we all are relevant in our lives. So when you set a horror movie around these things, it just kind of piques your curiosity, and it just kind of is a good setting for a horror film. So it worked, and people in 1881, it seemed to be a trend that people were jumping on. But in 82, like I said, there's four films here, and um, I'm I'm stretching to grab them as four. So we have Friday the 13th Part 3, which for sure. Honeymoon Horror, again, honeymoon. I guess that's a holiday. It's an event. It's a life event. So I put it in here. Trick or Treat's clearly a Halloween title. So, that checks the box. And then the last one that fit in here for me was the Slumber Party Massacre. And again, it's a reach, Slumber Party is a thing. It's an event, teenagers look forward to. So yeah, like four holiday themed slashers at the most. And again, it's just, I don't know if people are slowly starting to run out of ideas at this point. They're grasping at straws for ideas for these films. I don't know. It's something, it's something to explore. And again, like I said, another cool thing about this year, this was the first year that we get like a 3D slasher. So, Friday the 13th Part 3. Before this, this was like right in the middle of the early 80s revival. So there were other films that came out. There was some in the late 70s. There was some Asian, there was a kung fu film. I believe it was called Dynasty. Um, in 3D. And then there was other films like in the horror genre, but not necessarily the slasher genre. Like there was an Amityville 3D movie. Also, I believe in 82 was Parasite. And there was a few other ones sprinkled throughout the early 80s. And there is, I believe, only one more in the slasher genre that's coming up in 1984 in Silent Madness. So for whatever reason, it didn't. I wish it would have stuck, because I think they're a lot of fun. The 3D slashers, that's something I really enjoy. Um, but it unfortunately just never really caught on. I guess maybe the budget, it was too expensive to make, and that's kind of defeats the purpose of these films. They're meant to make a cheap budget, make a big profit. I don't know. So yeah, just I just wanted to take a look at some of the brief overview of some of the films that we're talking about here. So let's get into some of the stats now. First thing I'll look at is the budgets here. Now we have some decent numbers for budgets here, thankfully, and it's pretty interesting. Like I said, the biggest budget film of the year was Visiting Hours. Now, Visiting Hours is a film with a pretty star-studded cast, so I'm assuming that most of the money in the budget went towards that. But it's a good film, solid film, well made. So I guess it does make sense. It's one of the most highest budget films of the year. And then of course, Friday the 13th Part 3 at a $4 million budget, guaranteed most, if not all of that, went into the 3D camera work that was involved. And then the next biggest one I have is Humongous, which is pretty surprising, because Humongous is a film that I'm not a big fan of. I didn't. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Humongous. It looked good, I guess. It was, I guess it was filmed. It was filmed nice, so I guess that's where the budget came in. But then as you go down the list, you see like Blood Song, The Ghost Dance, and that's it for $1 million budgets, and everything under that is less than $1 million. All the way down to Honeymoon Horror and Trick or Treats with just around a $50,000 budget. So yeah, they're not reporting box office returns because they probably didn't do too well. What's surprising on this list, obviously, is the Slumber Party Massacre at only a $250,000 budget. Very surprising, but it is a Roger Corman film, so he's been known to make these movies on the cheap, and but he's a veteran filmmaker and he knew what he wanted, and yeah, Slumber Party Massacre turned out really well. $250,000 budget. That's yeah, I was surprised by that number. And then the only other one I would say is the Dorm That Dripped Blood, $150,000 budget. Um, that sounds about right. That budget. I like that film. It's a good film, good fun slasher. But yeah, I'm surprised it's actually 150,000. That seems high for the type of film that it turned out to be. A very low budget. But yeah, so now when we get to the box office returns, like I said, I only have four. I could only find information on four of these films, which is really disappointing. But as you can see, Friday the 13th, it brought in almost $37 million, and like I said, the whole year that I had is just over 53. So basically, the one film carried the entire year. Now, Visiting Hours did well. Visiting Hours, like I said, it had a $5.5 million budget, but it still made over 13 million. So yeah, that was a profitable film. It did really well. Again, probably due to the cast. It would draw people into the seats. But then you see the Slumber Party Massacre, which is great. A $250,000 budget, making 3.6 million, which is fantastic. So that one did really well. And like I said, the last one I found information for was the Dorm That Dripped Blood, $150,000 budget. It made 215, so it was profitable. So again, when we look at the most profitable, it's the same four films. Pretty good. Friday the 13th killed it. It was clearly the biggest film of the year, without a doubt. And then Visiting Hours, Slumber Party Massacre, they did good. I'm sure they were very happy with the returns. And I'm sure the filmmakers who made the Dorm That Dripped Blood were probably happy too. 65 grand is a good chunk of money, I guess. I don't know. And that's it. Adjusted for inflation, that's probably a couple hundred grand. So, yeah. So I wish we had more information, but regardless, if we had the box office returns for Island of Blood, Deadly Games, Unhinged, Blood Song, Girls Night Out, Honeymoon Horror, they're not gonna be bringing in $5, $6, $7 million. They're gonna be in the hundreds of thousands range. So this was a down year, for sure, from 1981. So yeah, so let's just wrap it up. So that was just, again, just some look at some of the stats there. So let's just wrap this up, and take a look at just some final thoughts. So yeah, so 1982. So basically, where are we at during this point in the the 80s slasher craze? So 1980 was a solid build up, like slash foundational year. Really good year. It started slow, a little eclectic of what it was trying to do, but once it found its footing in the type of films that were working, mostly due to Friday the 13th, the genre started to take off, and a formula was laid out, started working, and we went from there. 1981, the genre exploded. It took all the stuff from Halloween and Friday the 13th that worked, and they just kind of put it in a blender, and started spitting out these different scripts, different styles of movies, but all, in the same formula. And it worked. And they were making money, every week there was a new slasher in the cinema. And they were good films. They're like, a large majority of the 21 films released in 81 were good. So at this point, I feel like we were bound for like a pullback, even though there was just as many films. But like again, like I've asked it a couple times in this video, but the question is why? And again, my speculation is that it's mostly due to viewer fatigue. It just, you saturate the market with one too many things too many times, and people are just gonna pull back. It's just human nature. So I'm sure that probably played a part in it. Again, lack of creativity. Just a lot of the ideas have been used. Um, like I said, all the holidays, most of the holidays have been used up. So now in '82, we're getting, honeymoons and slumber parties, and yeah. So, but again, I think it's just people were just maybe they were just getting greedy. They were just like, let's put a lesser quality film together with lesser budget, and if we're gonna have a lesser budget, we're gonna cut it out of the practical effects. And that's what people go to these movies for, is to see these graphic, well done kills, and the people who did that the best were the most successful usually. Um, so I just feel like that was one of the reasons why there was a pullback. So again, but like who knows? This is yeah, like who knows? But it's obvious that this 1982 was a step down from 1981. But with all that being said, there's still some fantastic films. Some of my favorite in the genre are in this year. So yeah, like 1982 was, it was a year with a lot of content, um, but really only a handful of really good slashers that have proven that they've stood the test of time. In just repeated chatter online, Blu-ray releases, special edition DVD releases, like they've always been in the conscience of horror fans. Whenever there's a new media format, these are the first films. Like the Friday the 13th always get a release. Slumber Party Massacres always get a release. These are the films that people like, that they want to continue watching. So, um, unfortunately, 1982 just didn't have a lot of those films that have stood that test of time. So yeah, so that's basically my final thoughts on the year. 1983 is next, so we'll see how 1983 plays out. Does the downward trend continue, or is there a little bit of a bounce back from '82? Maybe it's just a little sophomore slump type of thing. I don't know. We'll see. We'll stay tuned for the 1983 year in slashers. But just so you know, next video I will be doing my top 5 slashers from 1982. So that'll be the next video on the channel. So stay tuned. If you want to make sure you don't miss that, hit the subscribe button. You know, anyone has any thoughts, comments, films they like, films they dislike from 1982, leave a comment below. That would be most appreciated. And like I said, if you haven't checked out my 1981 Year in Slashers video, I'll put it up on the screen right here now. And I'll also put my top 5 slashers of 1981 on the screen as well. All right, guys, so that's it. So yeah, until next time. All right, see ya.